I can't shake the image of the McDonald's kitchen at 3 a.m., the dim lighting flickering over the grease stains on the floor, the hum of the freezers, and the silence. God, the silence. It wasn't always that way. At first, it was just another night shift, the usual routine: prep the fryers, keep the register running, stock the drinks. But that night, something was off. It was too quiet. I could hear every little sound: the soft rustling of the paper wrappers, the clink of metal, my own breathing. But there was something else too, something wrong. I remember staring at the clock, counting the minutes until my shift was over. I was already tired. The only thing that kept me awake was the fact that there were no customers. That's weird for a McDonald's, even at this hour. Usually there's at least one car in the drive-thru or someone wandering in. But that night, it was empty. The restaurant had been dead for almost an hour when I saw it. A figure standing by the window, just outside in the dark. It was hard to make out any details, but I could tell it was tall. Too tall. Way too tall. It didn't move, didn't even seem to blink. Just stood there, staring into the store. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I couldn't breathe. My body wanted to move, to turn away, to look anywhere else, but my eyes were locked onto that figure, and I couldn't look away. It felt like something was pulling me in, like I was stuck in a trance. My legs wouldn't move, no matter how hard I tried. I glanced at the door, locked. The back door. Locked too, but I felt the unmistakable sensation that I was no longer alone. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but it felt like an eternity before the figure moved. The figure's arm extended slowly, like it was reaching for the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. And then, it was gone. I blinked, and it was just empty space again. No one was there. But my pulse was still racing, my body trembling from the sudden surge of adrenaline. I stood there frozen, wondering if my eyes had tricked me, wondering if I had imagined it. I wasn't alone, though. I could feel someone behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. The kitchen was still. I was alone, right? But then something slammed against the back door. I whipped around, heart thundering in my chest. The shadowy figure had reappeared, right behind me, its face inches from the glass, its eyes dark and hollow, just staring at me. My hands went cold, and the only sound in the kitchen was my ragged breath. There was no escape, no way out. That's when the lights went out. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was tight, like someone was choking me from the inside. The lights flickered back on a moment later, but everything was different. The kitchen felt wrong. The air felt heavier, colder, like something had changed. Something had moved in. And then I heard it. A voice, faint at first, almost like a whisper, coming from behind the counter. "You're not alone," it said. I turned toward the counter, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, but I couldn't see anyone. No one was there. No one except me and that figure outside, or was it? Then I heard it again, louder this time. "You're not alone." I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around. There was nothing, nothing but the cold air, the same greasy kitchen, and the deafening silence. But something was there. I could feel it. Something watching me. And then, just as I was about to bolt for the door, I saw it. A message scrawled across the floor in ketchup. "Yuri in Ext." The room spun. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. I could only stare at those words, terrified, as if they were written in my own blood. And then, just like that, I heard the voice again right behind me. "It's your turn." I don't know how I ended up at this point, how things went from normal to this, but the night had only begun. I wish I could say I ran out of there, that I screamed and bolted for the door, but I couldn't. My body refused to move. The cold hand on my shoulder, the voice in my ear, it paralyzed me. All I could do was stare at the ketchup-smeared floor, at those words written out in such a cold, cruel way. "You're worry in next." I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but when I finally managed to look up, the kitchen was still empty. The voice, the hand, everything was gone. Just the sound of the refrigerator humming and the occasional drip of water from the sink. I should have left. I should have called for help. But I didn't. Something kept me there, rooted to the spot, like I had to see it through. Maybe I thought I was just hallucinating. Maybe I convinced myself it was just exhaustion. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was in that restaurant with me. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes. 3:30 a.m., 3:45 a.m. The last few customers had long since driven off. and I hadn't seen a single car pull up since. I glanced at the drive-through window. It was dark, empty, no movement. I looked back at the counter at the ketchup stain on the floor. It looked almost fresh, but it couldn't have been. I had been standing there for what felt like forever, staring at it, and it hadn't moved. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard the soft scrape of a chair dragging across the floor. My head snapped up. The sound had come from the back of the restaurant, from the break room. It was too soft to be a person, more like something, dragging itself along the ground. I didn't want to go near it. I didn't want to look. But my feet seemed to move on their own. I stepped slowly toward the back, my legs shaking, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. My stomach twisted into knots, but I couldn't help myself. I had to check. I had to know what was making that noise. When I reached the break room door, I hesitated. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, but the door opened on its own, like someone had been waiting for me to do it. I jumped back, heart pounding. But there was no one in the break room. It was empty. That didn't make sense. The noise had come from here. I stepped inside slowly, my eyes scanning every corner. I couldn't see anyone. The only thing in the room was a table with a few chairs scattered around, some old uniforms hanging from a coat rack, and the faint smell of burnt coffee. Then I saw it. A single chair tipped over, lying on the floor. The scrape noise from earlier. It had come from the legs of that chair. Something had dragged it. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone here?" Nothing. The only sound was the quiet hum of the lights above, the faint thrum of the freezers, and the soft ticking of the clock. I felt ridiculous, standing there alone, talking to an empty room. I turned to leave, but then I noticed something strange, a footprint on the floor. A boot print right in front of the chair. It wasn't my shoe size. It was big, heavy, the kind of print someone would leave if they were wearing boots or heavy shoes. But I hadn't heard anyone enter. There had been no one in the room before. I backed away, my breathing shallow, my heartbeat racing. I couldn't stay there any longer. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I turned and quickly walked back into the kitchen, trying to keep my cool. The last thing I needed was to panic. I reached the counter, the familiar sight of the grill and fryers almost comforting in comparison to the eerie feeling in the break room. I turned around to check the drive-through window again. Still nothing. Still quiet. But then I heard something else. A whisper. But this time, it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from the drive-through speaker. I couldn't believe it. The drive-through speaker was off. There was no one out there. The car park was empty. But there it was again. A whisper, barely audible, like someone was speaking right into the speaker, their words distorted and muffled. I walked closer, my feet dragging against the tile floor. My hands shook as I reached for the speaker. The static crackled as I pressed the button. "Hello," I said, my voice unsteady. "Who's there?" For a moment there was silence. And then the voice came through again, clearer this time, but still eerie and strange. "You will be next," it said. I yanked my hand away from the speaker, my body recoiling. It wasn't the voice of a customer. It wasn't a normal voice at all. It was low, distorted, almost like it was coming from a throat that shouldn't even be able to make sounds. I spun around, looking frantically around the restaurant, but there was no one there. Nothing but the cold air, the dull light, and the hum of machines. My mind was racing, but the more I thought, the more I realized. I wasn't alone. That much was clear. And then, as if on cue, I heard a loud crash from the back door. I froze. The sound echoed through the empty restaurant. Something had just thrown itself against the back door, hard enough to rattle the walls. I rushed toward the back door, my heart pounding in my chest. The closer I got, the more my fear intensified. What was out there? What was waiting for me? My mind screamed at me to turn around, to run out the front door, but I couldn't. I reached the back door and peered through the tiny window. And then I saw it. A face. Just a face, staring back at me through the glass. It was pale, almost sickly looking, with dark, hollow eyes and a twisted grin stretching across its mouth. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. That face. It wasn't human. It was something else. Something wrong. The face pressed against the glass, its eyes wide, its grin widening. "You're next," it whispered again, its voice barely audible, as if it was speaking directly into my mind. I couldn't stand it anymore. I turned and ran toward the front of the store. But as I passed the kitchen, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The fryers were bubbling. The grill was sizzling. The kitchen was coming to life, like it was preparing something, something for me. And then, before I could make it to the door, I heard something I'll never forget. The soft sound of footsteps following me from behind. Someone, or something, was following me. And I didn't know how long I had left. The footsteps behind me were getting closer. I could hear them more clearly now. Slow, deliberate, each step heavy and unmistakable, dragging across the floor. I dared not look back. I just kept running, my heart slamming in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The door to the kitchen was just ahead. If I could make it to the door, maybe, just maybe, I could get outside. I had to try. But as I sprinted toward the front door, something strange happened. The closer I got to the exit, the heavier the air felt. It was like the whole place had gotten thicker, suffocating me, pulling me down. My legs felt like lead, and I stumbled, almost falling. I pushed myself up again, ignoring the sharp pain in my side, and reached for the door. I grabbed the handle, but it didn't budge. I yanked it harder, but the door was locked. It was as if it refused to open. Panic set in. I turned to the kitchen, but the way back was blocked off now. The fritters were bubbling more aggressively, the grill roaring louder, and the whole room felt alive, like it was waiting, like it was hungry. The footsteps grew louder, and I spun around, my eyes wild. I was trapped, completely trapped. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the lights above me flickered out. The restaurant was plunged into darkness. I froze. The only thing I could hear now was my breathing, loud, frantic, and the faintest sound of whispering. It was barely audible, but I could tell it was coming from all around me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was mocking, taunting. Then a voice, the voice, came through the darkness, cold and twisted, like it was seeping into my very soul. You think you can escape? I turned in every direction, trying to find the source of the voice. Who are you? I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. What do you want from me? The whispering stopped for a moment. Then the voice returned, but this time it was closer, much closer. You already know what I want, it rasped. I gasped and stumbled backward. My body slammed into something cold and solid. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and the silence that followed felt more suffocating than the darkness itself. I had to get out of here. I couldn't stay in this cursed place any longer. I ran for the back door again, but this time I didn't even bother to check if it was locked. I just knew it was. And when I reached it, my worst fear was realized. The back door was wide open. I stopped dead in my tracks. I don't know how I didn't hear it open. How it had opened without any sound, but it was wide open now, just enough for a person, or something, to fit through. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I saw standing just outside the door. The same figure I had seen earlier. The tall, dark figure. But this time, it wasn't standing still. It was moving, slowly, toward me. Each step it took was so deliberate, so calculated, like it was savoring the moment. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My body was frozen. I couldn't move. The door was wide open, but I couldn't leave. It was like an invisible force was keeping me there, rooted to the spot. I saw the figure's eyes. They were black. No pupils, no whites, just endless, bottomless voids that seemed to draw in the light around them. Its mouth was stretched wide, grotesque, as if it had been smiling for so long that its face had contorted into a permanent grin. It reached out its hand toward me, its fingers long and sharp like claws. You're next, it whispered again, its voice impossibly low, sending a wave of ice through my veins. I didn't have a choice. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I thought I was going to do, but my body moved on its own. My feet carried me into the dining area, or the play area where the kids would normally play during the day. But tonight, it was just shadows, dark corners, and empty chairs. I heard the footsteps again, faster now, as if the figure was chasing me. The door had been open for so long, I could hear the wind howling from outside. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone anymore. I turned a corner, my chest tightening, my legs weak. I saw the front door again, but this time there was something else, something blocking it. It was the figure, the same one from before, but now it wasn't alone. There were more shapes, shadows that seemed to take form as they moved closer, encircling me. Each one was just like the first, tall, thin, with those same dark, soulless eyes. They didn't speak, didn't make a sound. They just moved closer, the space between us shrinking. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what they wanted. All I knew was that they were closing in, and I had no escape. One of them stepped forward, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the floor, blocking the exit. No, no, I screamed, backing away into the corner. What do you want from me? The figure didn't answer. It just stared at me, its mouth twisted into a grin, that same wide, horrific grin. You're next, it said again, its voice like gravel, like it was speaking from the deepest part of the earth. And just as it raised its hand toward me, the lights flickered back on. I blinked, disoriented, and looked around. They were gone. The figures, the shadows, the voices. Everything was silent again. The restaurant was normal. For a split second, I thought I had imagined it all. Maybe I had. Maybe it was just the exhaustion, or maybe I had finally cracked. But when I looked down at the floor, I saw it. A boot print right in front of me. A fresh one. And I knew deep down that the nightmare wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't have much time. They were still out there. And they were coming for me. I don't remember how long I stood there staring at that boot print. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what I'd just seen, what I'd just survived. But the truth was, I didn't have answers. The more I thought about it, the more the fear tightened around my chest like a vice. I was trapped in that McDonald's, caught in some kind of nightmare, and I didn't know how to escape. The restaurant was eerily still. The fryers had gone silent, the grills no longer sizzling. It was like the building itself had taken a breath and was waiting for me to move. But I didn't dare. Not yet. I forced myself to look away from the boot print and turned back toward the kitchen. It looked normal again. The ketchup on the floor was gone. The bubbling fryers were quiet, and the lights had stopped flickering. For a brief moment, I thought maybe the worst was over. Maybe whatever was haunting this place had left. But then I heard it again, the whispering. It was faint at first, like the sound of wind slipping through a crack in the wall. But as I listened, it grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, layered, overlapping, all speaking at once in a language I couldn't understand. My stomach churned as the whispers seemed to seep into my ears, filling my head, drowning out every rational thought. And then I saw it. The fry station, the same one I'd been standing near all night. The light above it was flickering again, casting strange shadows across the walls. At first, I thought it was just the bulb struggling to stay lit, but then I realized the shadows weren't random. They were moving, deliberately, purposefully. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and that's when I noticed the shapes. Human-like, but distorted. Elongated arms, twisted legs, heads tilted at unnatural angles. They flickered in and out of existence, like they were trying to break through the barrier of reality. My throat tightened, and I backed away, my foot catching on the edge of a mop bucket. The clatter echoed through the empty restaurant, breaking the tension for a moment, but the shadows didn't stop. They grew stronger, clearer, until I could see their faces, or what should have been faces. Each shadow had the same wide, unnatural grin, the same hollow black eyes that seemed to pull you in, to trap you. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away from the shadows, from the whispers, from all of it. My feet pounded against the tiled floor as I bolted through the kitchen and into the break room. I slammed the door behind me and pressed my back against it, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The break room felt different now, smaller, darker. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting a dull glow over the cramped space. I glanced around, my eyes darting from corner to corner, half expecting one of those figures to appear. But the room was empty, for now. My phone. I needed to call someone. Anyone. My hands fumbled as I pulled it out of my pocket and unlocked it. The screen lit up, and for a split second, I felt a sliver of relief. But then I saw the screen. It wasn't my home screen. It wasn't my list of contacts. It was them. The figures. Their faces. Dozens of them, staring back at me from my phone, their twisted grins wide, their hollow eyes endless. And they were moving. I dropped the phone like it had burned me, and it hit the floor with a sickening crack. The screen shattered, but the faces didn't disappear. They stayed there frozen, even as the glass spider webbed across the display. I didn't have time to think. The whispers were back, louder this time, coming from the door behind me. The handle rattled violently, as if someone, or something, was trying to break in. I stumbled backward, my eyes darting around the room for anything I could use to defend myself. My gaze landed on a metal chair propped against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I grabbed it and held it in front of me like a shield, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep my grip. The door creaked open inch by inch, the handle still rattling. I braced myself, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and waited for whatever was on the other side to reveal itself. But nothing came through the door. Instead, the light above me went out. Darkness swallowed the room, and I was left standing there, gripping the chair like it was the only thing keeping me alive. My eyes struggled to adjust, but all I could see were shadows. Moving shadows, surrounding me. I felt it before I saw it. A presence. Cold, heavy, pressing down on me from all sides. The air grew thick, choking, making it impossible to breathe. My grip on the chair faltered, and it slipped from my hands, clattering to the floor. Then, from the darkness, a hand emerged. Pale, skeletal, its fingers impossibly long, tipped with sharp black nails. It reached for me, its movements slow, deliberate, like it knew I couldn't run. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I could only watch as the hand grew closer, its nails grazing my skin, leaving a trail of ice in their wake. And then, just as the hand was about to close around my throat, the whispers stopped. The darkness lifted. The room was empty. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. My mind was a mess, unable to process what had just happened. I looked around the break room, half expecting the shadows to return, but there was nothing. Just the faint hum of the light above and the shattered remains of my phone on the floor. I should have felt relief. I should have been grateful that it was over. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't over. And then I heard it. A knock. Coming from the front door. Slow, steady. Each knock reverberated through the empty restaurant, shaking me to my core. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see who or what was on the other side. But I didn't have a choice. I stood, my legs weak, and made my way toward the front door. The knocking didn't stop. It was rhythmic, almost like a countdown. Knock, knock, knock. A steady, methodical beat that echoed through the empty restaurant. Each strike of the door sent shivers through me, vibrating in my bones. I couldn't just stand there. Something was out there, someone, or something. And they weren't leaving. I had no choice. My legs moved before I could think. I took a step toward the front door, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, and reached for the handle. My fingers were slick with sweat, trembling uncontrollably, but I had to open it. I had to see who was out there. Was it a person? Was it real? The knocking continued louder now, as if urging me to act. I hesitated for a split second, trying to gather my thoughts, but my mind was spinning. I took a deep breath, gripping the door with all my strength, and yanked it open. Nothing. The parking lot was empty. The street lights flickered in the distance. The only movement was the wind, gently rustling the trees nearby. My heart pounded in my chest, but there was no one there. No figure. No shadow. I stepped out cautiously, my breath catching in my throat, scanning the darkened parking lot. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd been through too much, and my mind was playing tricks on me. There was nothing out here. But the moment I turned back toward the door, I froze. It wasn't the empty lot that scared me. It was the shape standing in the doorway. It was the same figure. The tall, dark one, its face twisted in that grotesque grin, its hollow eyes staring at me from the darkness. It hadn't been there a moment ago. It couldn't have been, but now it was standing in the doorway, its presence filling the space like a shadow that wouldn't let go. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. No, 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 I whispered, shaking my head. I wasn't ready for this. Not again. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, its mouth stretching wider with every second, as if savoring the fear that was crawling up my spine. "You're next," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. I didn't wait for it to say anything else. I turned and bolted, running across the parking lot toward the street. My mind was a blur, panic overtaking my every thought. I had to get away. I couldn't stay here anymore. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I ran for what felt like forever, my lungs burning, my legs giving out beneath me. The road stretched on, empty and silent, but I didn't stop. Not until I reached the corner of the street. I slowed out of breath, leaning against a streetlight. I looked back, expecting to see the McDonald's in the distance, but it wasn't there. The building was gone. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But when I opened them again, the McDonald's was just gone. The parking lot, the sign, the entire restaurant. It was like it had never been there at all. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. No, this can't be happening. This isn't real. I turned away from the empty lot and started walking, trying to collect my thoughts, trying to make sense of what was happening. The streets were quiet, but something felt off. There was no one around, no cars driving by, no lights on in the windows of the houses I passed. The whole town seemed dead. That's when I heard it. A faint, familiar sound. The whispering. It was soft at first, like a distant murmur, but it grew louder as I walked. It was coming from behind me, from the shadows, and it was so clear now. You're next. You're next. I froze. My blood ran cold. The voice was so close, too close. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty street and the pale streetlight casting long shadows along the sidewalk. I heard a scuffling sound behind me, like footsteps dragging against the pavement. I whipped around again, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. The figure. It was standing at the end of the street, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. Its face was obscured in shadow, but I could feel its presence, pressing in on me like a weight I couldn't escape. You thought you could run, the voice whispered. It was low, guttural, like it was coming from somewhere deep underground. But you can't hide. You're mine now. I didn't think. I just ran. I ran without looking back, pushing my body to its limits. I could hear the dragging footsteps behind me, following at a steady pace. No matter how fast I went, it was always there, always close enough to touch. I reached the end of the block and turned a corner, but when I looked ahead, I froze. There it was again. The McDonald's. The same McDonald's. The one I had just escaped. It was back. I didn't know how. I didn't know why. But there it was, standing tall and dark in the middle of the street, like a nightmare brought to life. The lights above the sign flickered on, casting an eerie glow over the restaurant, and the drive-through speaker crackled to life. You're next, it whispered through the static, as though mocking me. The door to the restaurant swung open by itself, as if inviting me in. I couldn't go back inside. I couldn't face whatever was waiting for me. But my feet didn't listen. They moved of their own accord, pulling me toward the building like I was a puppet on strings. When I reached the door, I tried to turn and run again, but the door slammed shut behind me. It locked with a loud click, and the sound of it echoed through the restaurant like a death knell. I was trapped. The lights inside flickered again, and I heard the whispering. It was everywhere now, around me, inside me. 1,000 voices, all speaking in unison. You're next. You're next. You're next. And then I heard something worse. A voice clear and cold. My name. Tommy. I turned toward the source of the voice, my stomach dropping, and there, standing at the counter, was a figure. It was me. Or at least it looked like me. It was wearing my uniform, my name tag, and it was smiling that same twisted grin. My own face stared back at me with those same hollow eyes. You're next, it whispered again. And then it took a step forward. No, I screamed, backing away. But the room seemed to stretch, like I couldn't escape. I was surrounded by my own self, trapped in my own nightmare. And then I heard the door open behind me. But this time, it wasn't the figure that was walking in. It was someone else. I turned around quickly, my heart racing. The door to the back room creaked open, and I was sure I was about to see another one of those shadowy figures step into the room, their hollow eyes boring into me. But when the door fully opened, it wasn't a figure at all. It was Jessica, my coworker from earlier. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. She was wearing her McDonald's uniform, just like me, but there was something different about her. Her hair was disheveled, and there was a strange, almost vacant look in her eyes, as though she wasn't entirely herself. Jessica, I whispered, barely able to breathe, a sense of relief washing over me. Maybe she could help. Maybe she could explain what was going on. But as I took a step toward her, her eyes shifted. They were no longer just fearful. There was something else in them now, something darker, something that didn't belong. Jessica, what's happening? I asked, my voice shaky. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, staring at me with those lifeless eyes. And then, with a voice that wasn't quite hers, she spoke. You shouldn't have stayed. Her voice sounded hollow, like she was speaking from somewhere far, far away. The tone was flat, as though every word she said was an effort. Her lips barely moved when she spoke. I tried to leave, she continued, her voice growing quieter. I tried, but it won't let us leave. None of us can escape. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. What do you mean? What won't let us leave? I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. The flickering lights above her head cast eerie shadows, but I couldn't look away. I had to know what she was talking about. I had to understand. Her eyes, once full of fear, suddenly darkened further, becoming more hollow, more empty. She took a slow step toward me, and I couldn't help but take a step back, my hands trembling. The place, she said in a voice that was barely audible, the McDonald's? It's alive. It's been here, waiting. I swallowed hard. Alive? What are you talking about? Jessica, please, you have to tell me. She interrupted me, her voice now rising in pitch, as if she was struggling to speak. It knows who you are. It knows everything about you. It wants you. I was frozen in place, my mind reeling. What does it want from us? I demanded, my voice tight with fear. But she didn't answer. Instead, her lips curled into a twisted smile, an unnatural grin, just like the one I'd seen on the figures' faces earlier. And that's when I saw it. Her eyes. They were completely black now. No whites, no pupils, just pure, endless darkness. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't Jessica anymore. This wasn't the person I had worked alongside for the past few weeks. Whatever was standing in front of me, it wasn't human. I turned to run again, but the room seemed to warp. The walls stretched and bent, the door to the back room distorting as if it was no longer a door at all, just a part of the building. The entire restaurant seemed to be shifting around me, closing in, trapping me inside. Jessica, or whatever she was now, took another step toward me. I could feel the air around me growing thicker, colder, and I couldn't breathe. You should have left when you had the chance, she said, her voice now a low, echoing growl. It won't stop until it's done with you. I turned, my feet sliding beneath me as I sprinted toward the kitchen door, my legs barely able to hold me up. I had to get out of there. I had to get away from this thing that was pretending to be my coworker. But when I reached the door, it slammed shut in my face. I screamed, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The kitchen was no longer a safe haven. The walls, the floors, the air, all of it seemed to be suffocating me, closing in like some horrible breathing beast. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, slow, they were coming toward me. I spun around, gasping for air. And that's when I saw it. The figure. The same dark, tall figure that had haunted me since the moment I first stepped into this cursed McDonald's. It was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, its eyes empty, its grin widening, as if it were enjoying my panic. You didn't think you could escape, did you? It said, its voice like sandpaper scraping across glass. I backed away, my legs unsteady, my breath ragged. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. It was everywhere. The shadows, the whispers, the nightmare. And then, as if on cue, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. The figure took a step forward, and I could hear its ragged breathing, cold and unnatural. It was closer, too close. I stumbled backward into the wall, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst from my chest. The figure was right in front of me now, its cold breath washing over me. You're next, it said again, its grin impossibly wide. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. But nothing happened. The room fell silent. I opened my eyes slowly, expecting to see it looming over me, ready to drag me into whatever hell this place had become. But when I looked around, the figure was gone. The kitchen door was wide open. I didn't hesitate. I ran through the door, not caring where it led, just desperate to escape. I raced down the hallway, my breath shallow and frantic, but the hall seemed to stretch on forever. The farther I ran, the more distorted the walls became, the more the air thickened. And then I heard it again. The whispers. This time they were louder, clearer, more urgent. You're next. You're next. You're next. I looked around, the walls closing in on me, but there was nowhere to go. The hallway was endless. No windows, no exits, only the voices growing louder until they filled my mind completely. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the exit, the real exit. I ran toward it, my legs moving faster than they had all night. But as I reached the door, the whispers stopped, and the door slammed shut in front of me. I turned around, panting, my heart racing. And that's when I saw them. They were all standing there, watching me. The figures. And they were smiling.